Dear ones, here comes a fantastic completed novel. The entire story will be updated in one go. The main episode is about to begin. Just as I was getting off work and preparing to meet my blind date at a restaurant, my ex-wife suddenly appeared at the company's entrance. She was sitting in her own Ferrari, and with a commanding tone, she ordered, "I am the new president of this company. I now order you to work overtime. Finish your tasks, or you're not going anywhere." After hearing this, I crossed my arms and looked at her with disdain. Why should I? Seeing that I had no intention of obeying her at all, she slowly walked to my side. "I've done my investigation. That woman has been divorced 3 times, and she has been disloyal to people. She is not suitable for you." My anger flared up instantly. I pushed her aside. Because she didn't stand firm, Mohuai fell heavily onto the hood of her Ferrari. "So you know how to investigate. Then for years ago, when you falsely accused me of molesting your underage cousin at the company, why didn't you listen to a single word from me and just threw me out into the wilderness? Why didn't you mention investigation then?" I stared sharply at my ex-wife. "If you had just checked the surveillance, you would have known that I was on a business trip out of town that day." Mohuai struggled to get up from the car, clutching her arm. At that moment, it was the end of the workday, and a crowd had gathered in front of the company, filled with people just getting off work. Everyone was looking at me with disbelief, unable to fathom that I would lay hands on such an extravagantly dressed woman. At this moment, the company's security guards noticed the scene. They immediately rushed over. Mohuai, seeing this, instinctively raised her only movable arm to stop them. "Don't move, all of you." "But Ms. Mo," the puzzled looks on the guards' faces seemed to fill Mohuai with an inexplicable sense of pride. Straightening her posture, she addressed them. "I've already said it. Don't move. Didn't you hear me? He is my husband." I blurted out instinctively, immediately feeling how ridiculous it was. Covering my face, I looked at Mohuai, who had a pleading expression. "Husband? Am I not that good-for-nothing and grateful bastard? It's been for years." I never thought Mohuai would be the one to voluntarily expose the wounds between us. Looking at Mohuai, it felt like the scabs on my wounds were peeling off, starting to bleed again. I once shared a 10-year marriage with this famous female CEO. The mutual support we gave each other in life had me convinced that we would be happy forever. But for years ago, I learned the truth when Mohuai's childhood friend returned to the country. From that moment, she became unpredictable towards me, transforming from our once close bond into complete disdain. All it took was one word from her childhood friend, and she abandoned me in the wilderness, leaving me to die. It had originally been Mohuai's birthday that day. I had gathered everyone who was part of our life as a couple to celebrate, hoping to offer her some comfort from the weariness of the day. But what I received instead was a frantic call from her, a panicked phone call. "Kongji, where are you?" I greeted her with a smile and answered, "Waiting for you at home. When will you be back?" "Soon. Just stay home and wait for me." "Mohuai," your tone had already become noticeably cold, but I didn't pick up on it. When I saw Mohuai again, her childhood friend was standing beside her. He tearfully accused in front of the Mo family bodyguards, "I molested his 6-year-old cousin." Detailed account of my crime. How I tricked his cousin out of the house, brought him to the company's cubicle to do that. Kongji, I know you're jealous of my close relationship with Mohuai, but why can't you direct your anger at me? How could you stoop so low as to harm a child? You're truly too much. I stared in shock at this man who, ever since his return to the country, had constantly come to see my wife, playing the role of her childhood friend. It wasn't enough for him to destroy my relationship with Mohuai. He now wanted to publicly ruin my reputation. Damn it, Chen Songju, what nonsense are you spouting? Your cousin is only 6 years old. When did I ever molest her? Show me the evidence. Bring out the proof. Are you still trying to deny it even now? Chen Songju, enraged, pulled out a watch. This is the watch my cousin ripped off your wrist when she was struggling to resist your crime. This is the evidence. You monster. I stood there, stunned. That watch clearly belonged to Chen Songju at the time. It was a gift I gave to his cousin because she liked it. How has it now become evidence of me molesting her? I was about to speak, but my wife, Mo Huai, suddenly stepped out from the bodyguards and shouted, "Enough." As she said this, she walked up to me and, without warning, slapped me hard across the face. I immediately felt dizzy, a clear sign of how much force she had used. What are you still hiding at this point? I touched my reddening cheek and lifted my head, only to meet Mo Huai's tearful eyes, her gaze filled with red. Huai, don't call me that. You're calling me a beast who even preys on minors? A shiver ran through me as I looked at my wife in disbelief. Huai, you can't seriously believe this liar's nonsense, right? I didn't hurt his cousin. He's lying. Seeing that she remained unmoved, I frantically tried to explain further. If you don't believe me, go to the police. Let the police investigate me. Let the police find the evidence, alright? My hand, without thinking, reached out to grasp her shoulder, only to have Mo Huai violently slap it away. The sound was loud, echoing through the entire room. Her eyes were filled with utter disdain for me, without a shred of compassion. Stop trying to justify yourself. Zia Kongji, Songju has already clearly described your crime, and he's shown the evidence. How can you still try to deny it? After knowing you for so many years, I never realized you were this kind of person. Her voice noticeably paused for a moment, as if summoning all her strength in the next instant. With all her strength, she cursed me, calling me scum. I desperately shook her arm, as if searching for even the slightest glimmer of hope. How can a broken watch serve as any kind of evidence? Huai, we've been married for 4 years. You know my character. How could I possibly do such a thing? This time, Mo Huai didn't push my hand away. Instead, she crouched in front of me with a cold smile. Chen Songju, are you talking about your character? Her voice was icy, tinged with a trace of sorrow. Because of jealousy, you went after someone's little sister. Isn't that exactly who you are? Zia Kongji, is that your true self? After saying that, Mo Huai stood up, looking down at me with an air of superiority. And now, you still want to slander Wei Wei and Songju? Even Wei Wei has described every detail of what happened. How could they possibly lie to me? You wretched beast! At the party, my wife commanded the bodyguards to take action against me. The long sticks came down on my arms and neck repeatedly, leaving me battered and humiliated. The murmurs in the banquet hall grew louder. With my wife's testimony, everyone accepted Chen Songju's words as truth. They spat at me and insulted me. Some even hurled glass cups at me, joining the bodyguards in assaulting me, kicking my face. I was so wrong about Zia Kongji. You beast! I stared, my gaze fixed on my cold, indifferent wife. I couldn't understand. I didn't know why the woman I had loved for years would turn on me like this, all because of her childhood friend. With just one word, they've branded me as an unforgivable rapist. Why, after all these years of love, does it amount to nothing against someone else's lie? I tried to get up to explain myself, but what I saw was Mo Huai rushing into Chen Songju's arms, the entire scene laid bare. Songju, don't be sad anymore. I'll make sure you and Wei Wei get the justice you deserve. When I woke up again from unconsciousness, my hand touched the ground, now soaked from the rain. I stared at the yellowed soil in my palm, barely illuminated by the faint light of the night. I couldn't tell where I was, but my instincts told me I had to escape. Yet, as I followed the light, what greeted me was Mo Huai and Chen Songju huddled close together. They stood in the rain, standing in front of the car lights, looking at my miserable beat with an indifferent expression. I walked up to them, Putting my hands on the steep slope and panting, I asked, Mo Huai, what do you mean by this? Mo Huai squatted down and looked at me indifferently. Using violence to coerce and rape a minor. The punishment is a sentence of no less than 3 years. But I won't let you go through that kind of suffering. This entire forest belongs to the Mo family. For the next 3 years, you can repent here. Chen Songju, pretending to hesitate, said, 3 years? Mo Huai, yeah. Isn't that too long? After all, Kong Jije is still your husband. Even now, he's still pretending to be a good person. Compared to what this beast did to Wei. What I've done is already an act of mercy. I immediately called out to my wife, Hawaii, I really didn't hurt Chen Songju's cousin. If you don't believe me, call the police. The police can definitely prove my innocence. The police will definitely expose Lin Xieqi as the liar he is. As soon as I mentioned the word police, I noticed a visible tremor in Chen Songju's stance. But Mo Huai acted as if she hadn't seen it at all. She crouched in front of me once more and slapped me across the face again. Enough! Zia Kong Ji, when did you become so despicable and pathetic? You committed such a monstrous act. And yet you still refuse to admit your guilt. I've known Songju for many years. He would never lie to me about his own cousin's innocence. Your fate is now in your own hands. Fight for it yourself. As the sounds of the forest surrounded me in the night, all I could feel was fear, and I had no strength left to think of anything else. Watching the sun set each day, I could only helplessly carve a mark on the stone beside me. As I stared at the more than 200 marks before me, I still clung to my sanity. Helplessly, I gazed at the road just within reach. But I was trapped by the nearby guards, kept inside this cage. Countless times, I wanted to tell Mo Huai the truth about what happened with Chen Songju, but I never found the chance. I really hated that manipulative guy, Chen Songju, but the child was innocent. No matter what, I could never take my anger out on a child. This wasn't my fault. It was that bastard Chen Songju who slandered me. Every time I tried to escape, I was thrown back into the forest by the guards. What awaited me were their insults. Shut up, you rapist! How could you lay your hands on a 6-year-old child? If our job wasn't just to guard you, I would have killed you a long time ago. In the days that followed, it seemed that the new guards had long forgotten my true identity. Every midnight, they would rush into the forest, dragging me off the stone where I lay. And then the torture would begin again. I didn't dare resist. If I fought back, a group of men would pile on top of me, beating me until I was barely alive. My wounds couldn't heal. Scabs would fester and ooze. In the endless darkness, humiliated and tortured, I still thought of my wife. Still held on to hope for her. I hoped that the woman I'd spent years with would see the truth and remember the vows of love we made at our wedding, to always believe in each other forever. That hope lasted until the marks I carved into the stone became stained with blood, reaching a total of 1,800. That was when my emotions finally collapsed. I overheard from the guards that during the Liu Jie family's New Year's Eve party, Chen Songju had proposed to Mo Huai, and she accepted with tears of joy. That was when I realized why the guards dared to use me as their punching bag. My longing for my wife had been nothing but wishful thinking. All my endless yearning was just a dream. I was nothing more than a rapist without any rights. That's all I was in the eyes of others. At that thought, I couldn't hold back anymore. I went mad. Desperately trying to break free from this cursed cage, I had to get out, but I was pinned down by the guards, helpless. My screams of defiance echoing into the void, accomplishing nothing. Hold him down, shouted the lead guard, his hand bleeding from my bite. With a vicious sneer, he spat, "You dare bite me, you rapist?" He crouched down, looked me in the eyes as I lay on the ground, and spat on my face, saying, "How dare you?" What right do you, a filthy rapist, have? I'm disgusted just touching you. He stood up, turning his back to me, speaking to the other guards. There's stuff in the car. If anything goes wrong, I'll take the blame. But for now, kill him for me. Two guards quickly walked over to the car, opened the trunk, and pulled out an axe. They handed it to the leader, who took it without a word. Grinning maliciously, he approached me. This is all your own doing. As soon as he finished speaking, he raised the axe high above his head, its blade gleaming in the moonlight, aiming for my neck. Stop! The axe halted just 2 centimeters from my face, barely a breath away. As I snapped out of my terror, I, along with the guards, turned toward the voice. Mo Huai had appeared before me once again. But this time, I had no emotions left. I could only stare blankly at her, numb. It's time! Mo Huai shook her head indifferently. No! Although it hasn't been 5 years, it's already been 3. This time, I've come to see how much you've reflected. I didn't move. The woman snapped at me, commanding me to follow her. Panicking, I immediately moved my feet and followed behind her. Not handing you over to the police was the right decision after all. Just sitting in prison wouldn't mean anything. But seeing you like this, like a dog, makes me much more satisfied. I said nothing. I just nodded quietly. But that small nod seemed to excite Mo Huai even more. Oh, you really obey, don't you? Maybe I should leave you out here for a few more years, living like a wild man. I didn't want to be humiliated, but in this dark, sunless forest, treated as a tool for release, tortured and humiliated. Only by lowering myself beneath a dog could I survive. All I could do was keep bowing my head, saying, I'm sorry, without the slightest resistance. Mo Huai said nothing more. She drove me home. On the way, she told me about the assessment. Today is Weiwei's birthday. You need to apologize to Chen Songju's family. Beg for their forgiveness. I froze for a moment, remembering the scene from 3 years ago when I met Chen Weiwei. That day, Chen Songju used an excuse to leave his cousin with me. I had intended to refuse, but he dropped the child off and left. However, I had an urgent business trip, and I had no choice but to entrust her to a colleague. My colleague took care of the child for the day, but I never imagined that the sweet, innocent child from the day before would, the next day, team up with her cousin to fabricate lies and frame me. What did I do wrong? I turned my head and looked out the car window, taking a deep breath. I didn't do it. I'm not going to apologize for something I didn't do. Zia Kongji, what do you mean by that? I interrupted her. Mo Huai, let's get a divorce. Hearing my words, Mo Huai's fury ignited instantly. She slammed on the brakes, the force of the stop almost sending me crashing into the windshield. Zia Kongji, how dare you say something like that? Her face was written with pure rage. I looked at her expression, and my body instinctively recoiled in fear. But I still shouted, I didn't do what you're accusing me of. If you don't believe me, then let's get divorced. Call the police, let them investigate. Let's see if I'm guilty or not. Mo Huai's expression turned cold. Zia Kongji, I gave you a chance. Before I could respond again, she slammed her foot on the gas pedal. I clung desperately to the handle, feeling the wind howling past. By the time I realized it, we were already parked outside the company. Mo Huai opened the door, turning her head to glare at me with venomous eyes. Don't push me to my limit again. This is your last chance. It was right here that Weiwei was subjected to your cruelty. Now go inside the company, kneel down, and apologize to her. If Weiwei forgives you, I'll let you go. I felt suffocated, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I glared back at Mo Huai. I didn't do it. Why should I apologize? That's impossible. Mo Huai didn't argue anymore. Instead, she walked over to my side, opened the door, and dragged me out of the car. She pulled me to the front of the company's entrance. But since it was already midnight, the doors were locked. Mo Huai had no choice but to lead me to the security guard. Could you open the door, please? The security guard seemed to recognize me instantly, and with a cheerful smile, he pulled out a statue from behind him. Young man, I haven't seen you here in years. Look at this, what you brought me that day when you went on a business trip. I still have it displayed here. Mo Huai's eyes followed the guard's words, and it seemed like she saw something. A yellowed tag, and on it, a date that was clearly the same day Chen Songju claimed. I had threatened Wei Wei. It proved I wasn't even in the city that day. Mo Huai hadn't realized that on the very day in question, Zia Kongji had not been in X City at all. The security guard spoke. Seeing Mo Huai standing there completely stunned, she shook her head several times. Hesitating, she looked at the guard, rubbing her ears in disbelief. Uncle, are you sure it was Zia Kongji who gave you this? The old security guard, hearing her doubt, let out a small sigh. Of course. Although I'm an old man and tend to forget things, I never forget the people who've helped me. And after all these years, he never returned. How could I ever forget such a thing? As he spoke, the security guard picked up the small statue and pointed to the date engraved on it, handing it to Mo Huai. Look at this, what a good man this young fellow is. Just on a business trip for a day, but still didn't forget to bring this gift for an old man like me. The security guard's retelling of the story felt like a heavy hammer, pounding into Mo Huai's mind, leaving her dizzy and disoriented. If Chen Weiwei was supposedly lured here by me that day, but I wasn't even in the city, how could I have committed the crime? Mo Huai's breathing quickened. She turned her head to look at me. It was only at this moment that she realized I was innocent. Kongji, you really didn't hurt Weiwei? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked down at myself, at the reflection of a man who no longer resembled a human being. My face disfigured and my fingernails completely torn away. 3 years. It had been 3 full years. I turned my head away, unable to stop the tears welling up in my eyes. Mo Huai, how many times did I tell you? I didn't do it. I didn't, but did you ever believe me? Did you ever give me a chance to explain? Of course, your first love wouldn't lie to you. After all, you were childhood sweethearts. After all, you've known each other for so many years. Now, even though you know I wasn't there that day, you're probably thinking, aren't you? You're probably doubting that maybe your cousin just remembered the date wrong, rather than believing that I didn't commit the crime. Mo Huai seemed to be struggling to keep her balance. She staggered back a few steps, her face slightly pale. Perhaps deep down in her heart, there was still that small doubt maybe her cousin really had gotten it wrong. I walked to the security booth, took the phone from the security guard, and dialed the police call 3 years overdue. Officer, I'd like to report myself for possibly molesting a minor. You! Mo Huai's mind was already blank. She had no idea what to say. After I hung up the phone, I calmly looked at the woman I had once loved deeply. You don't believe my words. You don't believe the security guard either. Then wait for the police to come. When this is over, let's get a divorce. The company's responsible manager had done his job well. The surveillance footage from 3 years ago was still intact. When the officers arrived to investigate, they found footage showing me handing Chen Weiwei over to a colleague. The time I handed over the child, and the time Chen Songju had dropped her off with me, was less than an hour apart. And I never left the surveillance cameras during that time. Although there was no sound, it was clear that as I was leaving, Linshi had asked me for the watch. I couldn't refuse, so I gave her the watch. That same watch became the so-called evidence Mo Huai used to believe I had harmed Linshi. But now the truth was out. The police officers looked at me with hesitation, seeing my mentally drained and physically weakened state. They realized something wasn't right. Given my sudden report and erratic behavior, my body was frail, and I was clearly out of touch with reality, almost in a trance. I kept muttering, impossible. How could this be? Mr. Zia, one of the officers said, if you were wrongfully accused and suffered harm during this time, please let us know. I cast a cold glance at the woman beside me. Torturing someone in your own family's forest for 3 years. Doesn't that count as a legal detention and abuse? Before I could speak, Mo Huai, trembling, extended her hands toward the police. Officer, I want to turn myself in. I slapped her hands down. Mo Huai, even after everything, after all the misunderstandings, and the way you treated me, you still think I'm willing to forgive you? Mo Huai seemed to be struck by the slap, as if something clicked in her mind. A glimmer of hope appeared in her eyes. I looked at the woman standing before me, her face full of expectation. My voice remained calm. Mo! Don't you find it disgusting to say those words? I just want to say, I want a divorce first, to reconcile with you, to let go of these 3 years of inhuman torment, and forgive a woman who didn't even want to hear my explanation. I'm sorry, I can't do it. My heart already died in that silent forest. I was slandered by Chen Songju, publicly humiliated by him, and instead of investigating thoroughly, this woman chose to blindly trust her first love, convinced that I had committed such a monstrous act. 3 years. 3 whole years. She had plenty of time to uncover this pitiful lie. Just coming to the company and asking around casually would have been enough to realize that I was innocent. But she didn't. Even when you released me early, it was only so I could apologize to Chen Songju. You wanted me to apologize for a crime I never committed. My heart has long since grown cold toward Mo Huai. The passionate love I once had for her is gone. All that's left is disgust. Mo Huai stared at me in shock, her lips trembling. Kong Ji, I'm willing to go to jail. I'm willing to atone for the pain I've caused you. But can't you give me one more chance? Just one chance. Please don't divorce me. Mo Huai clung to my sleeve, her voice trembling noticeably as she half knelt on the ground. I'm sorry. I pulled my arm away forcefully, casually brushing off my clothes. A chance? When I was locked away in that forest, didn't you and your dear first love get engaged? Weren't you just planning to meet his parents? Already meeting the parents, huh? Mo Huai panicked instantly, crawling to my feet, desperate to explain. No! It's not like that. That was just acting. It was because Chen Songju's family was pressuring him, so I helped him out. I never wanted to divorce you. Kong Ji, I just wanted you to admit your mistake, so that after everything, we could be together. I didn't expect Lin Xieqi to lie to me. He'd never lied to me before. I just didn't know. I still love you. Mo Huai's sweet words. If it had been before, perhaps I would have believed them. But now, I just shook my head and laughed coldly. And how exactly do you think I should accept your apology? And how are we supposed to face our parents after all of this? Mo Huai knelt on the ground, unable to say another word. Shortly afterward, the police, based on their investigation, raided Chen Songju and Chen Weiwei's home, where they had been preparing for a celebration. They were both taken in for investigation on charges of defamation and inciting others to commit acts that endangered public safety. It turned out that those bodyguards who had beaten me so brutally in the forest had been paid off by Chen Songju. Chen Weiwei, being too young, was spared from facing charges, but her father was given a stern lesson by the authorities. As the police were leading Chen Songju into the police car, his eyes burned red with rage, and he shouted at me, Zia Kong Ji, you wretched thing! How dare you accuse me? You stole my wife. You took what was rightfully mine. What right do you have to accuse me? I looked at the entire scene coldly, my hands in my pockets, as if none of it mattered to me anymore. Watching the police car slowly drive away, I finally felt a sense of peace settle over me. I packed up everything that belonged to me and left that house, the one that had only brought me heartache and suffering, and moved to a new city. It took me an entire year to process the shadows that Mo Huai had cast over my life. I found a new job, rented a new apartment, and made new friends. Just when I thought my new, beautiful life was about to begin, I never expected that one day, Mo Huai would show up at my door again. Mr. Zia, her voice brought me back to the present. I took a sip of coffee, trying to calm my nerves as Mo Huai stood right in front of me. I tried to steady myself, but in the end, it has nothing to do with me anymore. We've completely separated. Sorry, I spaced out for a moment. Where were we in our conversation? The woman sitting across from me didn't respond immediately. Instead, her gaze shifted. Her tired eyes fixated on me as she spoke. Mr. Zia, you've already told me all the basics about yourself. I can tell that you're an excellent person, so I was thinking, maybe we could start by dating? I took another sip of coffee, preparing to answer, but she interrupted before I could speak. However, what? I asked, as she gently placed her hand on my wrist, stroking it suggestively. My brother has been sick recently, and his medical bills are piling up. If we got married, could you help me cover some of those expenses upfront? I'll definitely pay you back once I start earning more. Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I was reminded of what Mo Huai had said to me in the past. Miss Wang, I remember you mentioned before that you were an only child, and your parents work in stable government positions. They shouldn't be short of money, right? The woman froze for a moment, her expression becoming awkward. That was before. My mom got remarried recently, and my stepfather brought a younger brother into the family. I discreetly pulled my hand away, not wanting to engage further with her. I'm sorry, Miss Wang. I don't think we're a good match. Seeing her plan fail, the woman dropped the act altogether, scowling as she grabbed her bag and stood up. Cheap loser. What's the point of going on a date if you can't afford it? She stormed off, leaving me behind with nothing but the bitter taste of coffee. Crazy. I didn't respond, silently calling the waiter to settle the bill. But when the waiter arrived, they told me the bill has already been paid. I was confused, till I noticed a familiar figure standing outside by the window. It was Mo Huai. I got up and walked straight out the door, making my way to her. I told you, didn't I? That woman was just trying to scam money out of you. Aren't you still hungry? Want me to treat you to something? I shoved my hands in my pockets, looking at her coldly. No need. Besides, we're nothing to each other now. I hope Miss Mo can respect that. Upon hearing this, Mo Huai lowered her head, her voice trembling slightly. Just because we're divorced, we can't have a meal together. Even divorced couples can get remarried, you know? I couldn't help but let out a sarcastic laugh. You really think we could get back together? Mo Huai, wouldn't you be better off going back to your precious Songju? Incitement and defamation charges would get you a lighter sentence than mine. Zia Kongji, I'm not with him anymore. I'm not. I won't marry him. Watching her rush to defend herself, I couldn't help but find it all utterly ridiculous. I think the two of you are a perfect match, rotten to the core, together forever. I didn't bother to acknowledge Mo Huai any further, and headed home alone. I figured what I said was harsh enough to finally kill any hope in her self-righteous heart. But to my surprise, the next morning, as I prepared to leave for work, she had parked her car right outside my building again. She waved excitedly at me. Kongji! The woman hurried over to me with breakfast in hand. You haven't eaten breakfast yet, right? I made this myself. All I felt inside was annoyance. I ignored her, walking straight past her without a word. When I arrived at the office, Mo Huai still wouldn't give up, carrying the breakfast to my desk. I stared at the soy milk on my desk, watching the light mist rise from the cup, and felt nothing but disgust. I picked up the soy milk and, without hesitation, threw it in the trash. Mo Huai stood silently beside me, watching the entire scene, her eyes empty. For the next 2 weeks, Mo Huai acted as if nothing had happened, hovering around me constantly. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner were delivered to my desk, all neatly packaged in high-end containers. She waited for me at the office entrance, trying to pick me up after work. Her relentless affection was displayed for everyone to see. One night, while I was strolling by the river, I saw a building illuminated with the words "I'm sorry" in lights. Suddenly, dozens of cars drove by, each one loaded with colorful, extravagant flowers. The next day, a video of the Mo family heiress spending millions in an attempt to reconcile with her ex went viral, skyrocketing to the top of social media trends. But I calmly walked into my superior's office and handed in my resignation letter. That evening, when I returned home, I found Mo Huai again, curled up in a corner, quietly sobbing. The moment she saw me, she immediately stood up, but her legs seemed weighed down like they were filled with lead. She couldn't move. "Kongji, can't you truly forgive me? I really know I was wrong. I spent those 3 years in prison deeply reflecting on my mistakes. I've changed." I ignored her and continued up the stairs, preparing to enter my apartment. "I know I've wronged you in the past. You loved me so much, trusted me so much, but I repeatedly betrayed your trust and hurt you over and over. I'm truly sorry." Those words hit me like a bullet to the forehead. All the previous efforts to win me over, the money, the light displays, none of it mattered. Not as much as that single sentence. I turned to look at her. "Do you finally understand where you hurt me the most?" The woman was already sobbing uncontrollably, her face drenched in tears. She nodded through her sobs. "Those years we were together, I didn't just get used to being with you. I truly fell in love with you from the bottom of my heart. But I was too arrogant to certain that your love for me was unconditional, so I took it for granted. In reality, I can't live without you. I'm sorry, Chen Jin. I'm so sorry. Can we start over?" I instinctively started to nod. But then, in the next moment, it turned into a shake of the head. "Mo Huai, there's no future for us. Why?" I quietly gazed at her familiar face. Can a broken mirror be made whole again? Mo Huai froze. Her body weakened, and she slowly collapsed to the ground, unable to speak anymore. I no longer waited for her response. I opened the door and walked inside immediately. Mo Huai may have finally understood the past me, and for that I felt a sense of relief. But sadly, I no longer loved her. I had completely lost all feelings for her. Even if a broken mirror is pieced back together, it will inevitably shatter again in the future. And this time, into even more pieces than before. The next day, I received a message from the company. They had rejected my resignation letter. They promoted me to ranks instead, and informed me that President Mo had already left. When I returned to my office, I once again found breakfast on my desk. My colleague told me about Mo Huai, saying she had suddenly been called back by her family and was preparing to move abroad. There was a high chance she would never return to the country. My colleague also told me something else about the man who had deceived President Mo, Chen Songju. Apparently, he had plans to come to our company to seek revenge on someone. But Mo Huai found out halfway through, immediately reported him to the police, and exposed all his previous illegal activities. It seemed that Chen Songju would be spending the rest of his life behind bars. I looked at the last cup of soy milk on my desk, my gaze distant. This time, I didn't give it to my colleague. Instead, I picked it up and took a sip. The soy milk tasted good, but I no longer enjoyed it. I placed the cup back down and noticed the ring that Mo Huai had left on my desk. It was our engagement ring. I hadn't expected her to keep it all these years. I didn't choose to throw it away, but carefully placed it in my drawer, locking it inside. In the next moment, though, I tossed the key into the trash. I held on to the past, but I no longer wished to revisit it.